Welcome everyone, it's Daniel Coleman, founder and CEO of FTE again here, and I'd like to welcome you to a really enthralling session of our in-flight conference track, which is kindly sponsored by Intelsat. It's going to focus on navigating content disruption for very good reason. There has been a revolution that COVID has accelerated again in the way that consumers are getting their visual and audio content. So what does this mean for the IFEC community? We will find out now, and I'm delighted to hand over to the man I've co-created plans for this session with, Mr. Paul Harper, director at Harper & Co. He now works for himself, delivering product management and consulting services in a wide range of verticals. But before that, he spent 13 years with Air New Zealand, where he very successfully reimagined their complete IFEC offering after recognizing the disruption airlines were facing for the in-flight media experience caused by streaming media services. He's really passionate about this subject and the perfect man to lead us through this discussion. Paul, the audience is yours.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate that. Welcome everyone to this session. As Dan said, super passionate about this space for digital in-flight experiences. But today we're just going to focus specifically on content. If I look back to where I was in my role 2 to 3 years ago with in-flight digital products and specifically around content, there was disruption happening then, but not at much of a pace. Studios were attempting to change their models and had tried to change and put content onto streaming, but been blocked by cinemas in the US. So there was the desire for that. They were open to changing the new release window of the traditional first of the month, and conversations very open. But the logistics and the challenge around the supply chain kind of prohibited that. If you talk to some of the live TV offering channels, those broadcasters, they were open as well to being able to offer their content on different platforms. So you didn't necessarily have to add the hardware. But again, that just got quite hard. And the industry view was that that impact of disruption was quite some time away, that new release movies were king and that was the future. And the only way you'd ever get to watch those new release movies was going to be on the seat back of your in-flight entertainment. So that was kind of the view. Now, if we look at the experience that we're seeing through disruption and what's been driven by COVID. Production stopped, we all know that, and there's some countries that continue to produce some content, but by and large, it's stopped, and there's going to be a gap for that in the long term. Movie releases have been pushed out predominantly to 2021 and further, though some studios have pushed content either to their own streaming platforms or to others to get that content out there. What that's provided is data and insights which they didn't necessarily have before, and that is driving some strategic decisions and also some commercial decisions, and now they understand what the value of that content is on each of those platforms. The theatrical release window has very recently just been changed by one of the major studios from 90 days down to 17 days. That's a big change for us. And again, it just sees this trend where they start to really understand where the value of that content is for those eyes that they'll get. We're also hearing, unfortunately, that some non-theatrical departments have closed, and the responsibilities for those have moved to other areas within the studios, which sit within the digital areas who own streaming. So again, you can see this kind of picture of where the focus of the content going forward is taken more in that ecosystem view, where potentially before, content was seen just in that theatrical window. From an airline perspective, obviously been dramatic change for them, and from a content perspective, the fleet landscape has changed dramatically. And what that has driven in the past is older systems have meant content of a certain specifications had to continue through. The supply chain's been hard to break because you've had to meet the needs of these. So the opportunity that may come from these older systems being retired is really exciting to see. We've seen content cycles move. So where predominantly it was monthly cycles, airlines have gone to bi-monthly or quarterly or even further out, although that is on review monthly, and airlines hope to get back to monthly if that is where they see it from a commercial perspective and to drive that customer experience. We've seen customers are now hooked on the drug of binge watching, having these periods of time where they've been in lockdown and having to find other alternatives to entertainment. So where they may not have been engaging in platforms of streaming before, they now probably get 3 to 4 to choose from. So what the experience is when they come back in the future to in-flight, having consumed all this content, was going to be really interesting to see. For airlines, there's also been a reduction in teams, and what that's meant is a huge gap in the knowledge and the experience for what is a really complex area that we all know, this weird and wonderful world. And it's also meant the responsibilities moved to other teams who are also now questioning and asking, well, what does this mean? What does content mean? And challenging some pre-kind of normals that were understood. And the focus for airlines has to be around communication to make sure customers feel safe, feel well informed, and receive real-time notifications on their travel. And finally, if we look at the in-flight digital suppliers, suppliers are now reviewing their strategy and their purpose to remain relevant. What does it mean for them in the new world? How can they innovate? What platforms can they be on? And where is their business going forward? Their current sourcing models and how they program content is changing through those engagements through studios or through suppliers, and where potentially the airlines have a new relationship with partners, be it connectivity or other bases. And finally, there's a new generation of connectivity solutions coming through who's going to provide a seamless connected experience. We're going to hear a little bit more about that. But what will that mean for the delivery of content and how we navigate this disruption? So before we get into the panel, just want to paint a picture of the future, but the future's now. So right now, there's a student somewhere in the world traveling on a bus to school, and they're using their mobile device to be entertained through content. I think we've all seen that on our travels. They're chatting with friends on multiple social channels. They're catching up on a program they may have missed through a broadcast channel like the BBC, or they're watching an episode from their favorite streaming platform. They may have downloaded the content, or they're watching over 4 or 5G, but they're unlikely to have unlimited data plans that maybe business travel has. So they're really conscious of the use of their data. So the future again is now. This is their normal. This is their daily and expected experience through mobile device. And the developers of this experience have been working on this for years. They know that they've got limited bandwidth. They also know their audience. They also know they want to own that audience and communicate to them directly. So it should be no different for us in our travel digital platforms, in how we deliver our content to them and how we navigate this disruption, but be mindful of that future where there are parallels and the challenges for this. But if we think about that student traveling, what does that student's experience mean when they're in flight? So as we get into the panel, it's my pleasure to meet the team that we've got here today. So first up, we've got John Farrar, who's the Global Video on Demand Director at the BBC. We've also got Sandhu from WestJet, who's the Product Manager of In-Flight Entertainment. Also sharing the world of the content service provider, we've got Paul Colley, who's the SVP of Technology at Spafax. And finally, the person who represents the area where we're all looking to enable the future of content. On OneWeb, we've got the Vice President of Mobility, Ben Griffin. Welcome team, great to have you on board. So John, having spent the first half of my life growing up in the UK, and also wanted to work for the BBC, may I add, I remember having the choice of kind of 4 channels to watch content from, and that was the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, or Sky. It'd be great if you could give us an overview of where the journey that the BBC's on, with the increased number of platforms that are available to you, but also those that you're competing against, and where you've launched new digital streaming services to compete with those emerging content.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the BBC has been on, quite a journey. And if you sort of think back to the sort of UK, and obviously sort of over a decade ago, we launched iPlayer. And, at the time, Ted Sarandos, the chief content officer at Netflix, called it one of the great innovations anywhere in the world. And it's been hugely sort of influential. But, since that moment, Netflix has 200 million subscriptions around the world. This year it got 160 Emmy nominations, and it's able to strike these exclusive content deals with the biggest names in the world, whether it's members of the royal family, the likes of Michelle Obama, or producers like Ryan Murphy, Shonda Rhimes, J.J. Abrams. So that's what we're up against, and I think there's almost been this sort of transition, to some extent in the UK, but certainly globally, of trying to think, what is the space that we can play in, and globally positioning ourselves more as a large niche than as a sort of than a sort of mass service. And if you look at the UK, there are certain things that we need to do better. We need to reach younger audiences better. We need to sort of build out from iPlayer being catch up to offering more digital first content. And we need to keep the hit factory going, and the likes of Fleabag and I May Destroy You and Normal People. We need more of those. Globally, we've had many conversations about how do we grow the BBC, and there's sort of two routes you can go. Either you sell your content to other platforms, you sell it to HBO, Netflix, etc., or you build your own branded services. And we really have that hybrid model. But where we are looking to launch our own branded services, as I said, it's a sort of a pivot from thinking that we can be a real mass player to thinking we can own a niche, and we can do that very well. And what is that niche, and how do we make that as big as it possibly can be? So launching BritBox with ITV was our sort of first strategy there. We're sort of also looking at the moment at what other products we can take to the market. But globally, there is a recognition that we can't be at the scale of a Netflix or a Disney. We have to sort of find our niche offering in the global market.
So what does that mean with regards to kind of owning that experience? So if we look at the kind of the major studios really launching their own platform, they obviously get those data and insights. They're allowed to deliver that personalized experience. Is the challenge, I think what you're mentioning is that for your local market, for the BBC, you can provide that through iPlayer, BBC Sounds, and so on. But for the global audience, what does that mean? Yeah,
I mean, look, in terms of streaming products globally, we've got BritBox out there at the moment, and that's it. So BritBox, our joint venture with ITV, and we have sort of two models. One is our direct-to-consumer app, and the other is our syndicated model, where we sit on Apple, and we sit on Amazon, and we sit on the sort of various platforms. And obviously our data path there is limited. So even though that is responsible for most of our distribution, it's that sort of smaller D2C element where we've got that direct relationship with the customer that allows us to harvest much richer data, and therefore impact on our editorial decisions for the service as a whole, whether syndicated or direct to consumer. So having that sort of, even if it's a sort of lifeline of a direct to consumer model, and it's not providing us as many subscribers as the syndicated route, it's that allows us to shape and direct the service.
And the point I made earlier around, again, I'm going to keep bringing everyone kind of back to the stories I see of the student on the bus, is that, is the BBC really cognizant of the fact that they need to deliver content in these smaller packets? Because, and the reason I bring that up is that from an aviation perspective, we're only going to benefit from that. We hear that there's high bandwidth either for live TV or streaming of content, but if you're trying to get it down into smaller packets to get your content out either domestically or globally, we're only going to benefit from that. So is there work the BBC is doing in that space?
So I can only sort of speak about that editorially. And what we are not trying to do is launch services that can be everything for everybody, that become this, the sort of Walmart of British content and just have thousands and thousands of hours. What we are looking to do is to launch very tightly curated, large niche services that target a bespoke and specific audience that we think is underserved in the market, and where we've got the opportunity to launch our best content out to them. So, BritBox being the sort of first example of that. And one of the things that I keep sort of coming back to is a sort of piece of research I saw a couple of years ago now. So it's it will have changed since then, which said that the average person spends 23 minutes of their life every day, 23 minutes of their day looking for something to watch, which amounts to just under 2.5 years of their whole life. And that seems to me to be the central challenge with streaming, which is how you grab people's attention. And, I think there is a huge role for the curator within that, who is saying, these are the essential things you need to watch. And, you need to understand those niche audiences inside out, and you need to curate for them. But, I see the role of the BBC not being to expand choice exponentially, but actually to limit it and to say, this is in this world of confusion and fog of too much choice, we are, only serving up what is essential and what is brilliant and what is premium.
Great. Thanks for that, John. Appreciate that. So, Jag, question for you, and just before we get into that, what a year it's been for you personally, obviously the WestJet team, and a personal shout out from me to your CEO and ex-colleague Ed Sims, that the empathy that he's shown and communication has just been incredible. But I know that you're in an in-flight digital space similar to where I was at in my role, and in-flight entertainment and in-flight digital products can sit lots of different places. But what have been the biggest challenges for you, and how have you navigated that over the last 6 months?
Yeah, Paul, thanks for having me here, and really glad to be able to have these conversations. Obviously, would have been much preferred to have them in person, but here we are with the new world, and I think that kind of brings us into the segue of airlines traditionally have always been, you're in the office, you're traveling, you're meeting with your people, you're meeting with your guests. A lot of that type of interaction to just understand how your business is running and how your customers are feeling and their guests. That's been probably the biggest change for us. Pivoting from that, that human element to a completely digital one, right? Where everyone's working from home. You have examples of, like John had mentioned, people spending so much time watching content or so much time finding content. The biggest challenge for us has just been pivoting quicker to our strategies that we, had out in the future a little bit farther away. But now with the opportunity to go through those trials and errors, how do we get those findings quicker, and then how do we learn from them to kind of move forward? That's one of our biggest philosophies is fail fast, learn fast. So we've been really hard working on that, but I think, like you mentioned at the start of the call, a lot of the knowledge, both from our partners out there and our organization ourselves, a lot of that knowledge has left the building, right? So it kind of brings a new mindset, which is good and bad. But I think it challenges us to think a little bit differently, and kind of like how you were saying with the platforms, with the content service providers moving towards or not having set content, and the content providers themselves doing it on their own platforms. We've been looking at it from that perspective as well, where how do we make the experience as frictionless as possible? But content is just a small piece of that at the end of the day. It's the overall experience that we want to try to better in that perspective as well.
Yeah, and on the content piece, what has the experience been that you've been offering over the last 6 months? Have you reduced it like other airlines?
Yeah, we've been very agile with it. We're evaluating it month to month right now. If there's opportunities, we'll do it a lot more frequently. If there's no opportunities, then we'll kind of move on from there, right? So one of the great things with our fleet, having a very young fleet, we've transitioned from a purely live TV product back in the day with Thales and Bell Express View here in Canada, where we had 15 channels of movies, but then we had over another 15 or 20 channels of live entertainment, live TV. And we've moved to a strictly static content base with connectivity. We have the luxury of playing around and being able to pivot with how the market's reacting, and that's worked out really well for us in this current pandemic. The biggest thing that I've seen from a guest perspective is, I was reading a stat from the New York Times from a study that they did, but on average, people are spending 8 hours of watching streaming entertainment right now. Wow. So by the time they get on board, what's really left, right? So, yeah. That I think, from really puts our partners in the content service provider space in a tough spot, because people are now more inclined to move towards connectivity versus just wanting content on board, because they've essentially consumed what they needed to before they even get on board that aircraft.
Yeah, look, I reflect again back to my old role that, then customers were asking for the content that we weren't able to license, make available. It sounds like that's going to just be heightened when travel returns, that again, they've got all this content, that 8 hours that predominantly isn't available to put in flight. So have you been able to get, just in this period, any feedback from customers around the reduced content of the standard that they used to see on that monthly cycle, even if they were even aware it was a monthly cycle, to what they're getting now?
We haven't seen any shifts one way or the other. I think the biggest shift that you'll see is when some of those frequent flyers start flying a lot more, or those business travelers, because the common guest doesn't know if you update it monthly, bi-monthly, weekly, yearly. They just know that when they get on board, there's content on board. They're most probably going to see the same content on their outbound than they are going to on the return. And that's, I think, a pretty standard thought process with guests out there. But I think the biggest thing for now is people aren't noticing, but what they are noticing is, the reduction in kind of that new and fresh content, which would have been our early release stuff back then, right? And for us, it's quite different because we only have seat back on our 787 wide bodies. Everything else for us is wireless streaming, right? So we had a really good mix between the two, and we tried to keep it as consistent between the products from a content perspective.
So from the 787 perspective, where you've got that more traditional view, the point I made earlier around studios changing their windows and potentially not offering content from 2022. You sit where I did in the in-flight digital space, so obviously your budget is across areas, and so what are the kind of thoughts you've got now? Is it how you split that, where you spend your money in the future, or how you invest to deliver the best customer experience? Is that what's kind of going through your mind? Yeah,
I mean, we don't have, we try not looking at it just as a one line item for content. We want to look at it from an overall in-flight entertainment experience. And, I don't think the split anymore is 50-50 between connectivity and content anymore. I think now, since this pandemic has kind of had its way, and people have got accustomed to what they need to, I think connectivity is where it's going to become even more important. Unless our friends in the content service space, have either new ideas or new ways to disrupt. I mean, just speaking frankly here, I don't. This is going to be controversial, especially with Paul at Spafax and stuff too. But I don't see how much more our partners in that space could provide, because they're dependent on the big studios, right?
Yeah. Well, let's bring Paul into that. Paul, what's your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not unexpected that airlines are starting to think like that at all. But I think, a couple of the points that have already been made by Jag and John are really where, we see the service that we're offering. We've talked about curation before and how that happens. John was talking about it on an iPlayer. We've talked a lot here about actually it's new, the new release content. Is that going to be available? Well, our belief is at the end of the day, the vast majority of content, even today, that was going on the airport on an aircraft was not new release content. It might be TV series, it might be classic content, things like that. So, the curation of that, don't believe that sort of expertise across distributors and studios and TV production companies will ever reside in an airline. As Jag just said, a lot, COVID has ripped out a lot of expertise, across many companies, and that's where we really see the value of a CSP. And we recently launched a product, Cinephile, which is a world movie curation service, looking at that very type of solution. But no doubt it's been, as you were going to say, a sort of tough 6 months. Content hasn't been refreshed as much as it has been previously. I think a company like Spafax has been in a great position to weather that. We've got WPP behind us. We come from a very stable platform, and we've continued to invest really to deliver that agility that we thought was needed, or we knew was needed pre-COVID. But post-COVID or during COVID is absolutely needed. And as Jack was saying, or you were saying about the refresh cycles, whether they're 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, being able to bounce around with that and deliver a service that delivers that economically, efficiently, and effective are all aspects that we've been working on and had been working on before, but are even more reason to need a supplier to deliver that for you. I think today and going forward.
It's tricky though, isn't it, Paul, for the content service providers? Often you're kind of seen as the ones in the middle, kind of facilitating the piece. You are the conduit between the airline, and you're trying to bring all the pieces together, which some of the challenges aren't always is yours. It's, if the content's not available and the
content, there's trouble on both sides. It's not just content availability on one side, but I mean, there isn't and never has been a shortage of content in and around. For sure, there might be a shortage of theatrical new releases, right? And are we saying that was fundamentally the reason for being for an IFE system? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But I think going forward, as Jack was saying, it's more about the rounded experience and what passengers are expecting. And I think, there will be more innovation in the content experience on board. We talked about, the traditional monthly load. I think there'll be more content that's loaded, sort of catch up and more frequently. There'll be more libraries built. There'll be more, potentially more, live TV built. The whole thing will come together as a package, and really bringing in other thinking around. We've already seen it a lot. Brand partnerships, how that works. There are airline brand partnerships that are already there, but every airline that we deal with wants to set up content brand partnerships. How do we do that? And again, the platform is not really there to do it today. So how do we bring that expertise to involve those platforms to do that? But on one side, there may be a shortage of new releases, but on the other side, that last mile of delivery, we would relish the chance to be able to push content to aircraft faster, cheaper, more frequently. That's our sort of, we would love that platform, right? As a content experience creator, it doesn't exist today. I know you talk, we've talked to Ben, lots of elements around that, but that last mile. The last mile is the hardest in many industries, not just ours, and condensing that is really something that I think has to happen to make this bringing the value to the passenger that they want.
We'll get to that in a bit. I guess keen to still explore though that the challenges pre-COVID was that there was some streaming content, the premium TV content that customers wanted to watch, and now they're getting promoted heavily at home that couldn't be licensed. And now you've got potentially theatrical movie content that isn't going to be available. And we are seeing that today from one studio, and it's going to continue to roll out. So what content does that leave you to license for airlines if the major share, and I know the budgets and what that percentage spur is, it doesn't leave a lot left. So what, strategically, where does that leave CSPs to remain relevant in that piece? Again, if you take into account that airlines don't have as much resource now that understand this space, they don't necessarily want those relationships. The studios don't have a department to provide the content direct. They're going straight. So, talk to me a little bit about where the relevance is for a content service provider going forward.
Well, I think, the studios, obviously, they need to speak for themselves. I can't speak, on behalf, as you mentioned, being a sort of partner of all of them. But I'm 100% sure, no matter what you say, that studios will sell content if they can sell it in an economic way. And I think that's the role of a content service provider, to work out how we can create that and deliver that commercial platform to both the studios and the airlines to make that sensible. That's just on a sort of studio new release front. But for sure, there is there is content not not available because the rights are held by a particular online content provider, but that was the case before COVID, and content's not the licensing of TV content's not particularly my specialism within Spafax. But I do not see a limit in the amount of content that is available. For sure, you may get some headline shows that are bought by a Netflix and they want to keep that for their platform. But COVID is going to change the dynamics of that. But pre-COVID, Q1 of 2020, I don't believe there would have ever been as much content purchased in IFE as what there was for that quarter. So, I don't think that's the issue. Also, I mentioned before around brand partnerships. How do those get enabled between both content content rights holders and production companies, even non-content production companies and airlines? How does that blend when there are multiple providers on an airline, and how does that experience meet the needs of the client in that, where the client is actually is the content owner at that point, even though they are sort of a seller, they're a brand, so they become a purchaser of media space on board the aircraft. And how is that enabled on board the aircraft? And Spafax's media background puts us in that position, I think.
So John, just appreciate you're not one of the theatrical studios, but again, just from the content perspective, I'm just really keen to understand that a little bit more, that a lot of content, premium, and it's not just new release movies, is it? It's premium TV content, premium content is going to their own platforms because they can own the data, own the experience, they can create that connection and personalize the experience. Can you relate to that, and from a BBC perspective, how you want to engage with your customers?
Yeah, as I was saying, I think for the BBC, it will always be a mixed model. So, we are never going to do a Disney or never going to do an NBC Universal and just pivot our strategy purely D2C. It's always going to be about, a hybrid where some routes might be selling directly to other platforms. Sometimes we'll want to sort of be building these ourselves. I think where we want to be building it ourselves, we kind of want to be going against the grain. So I don't think, let's say premium drama, for example, and the sort of drama that's driven streaming viewing over the last 5 years or so, it's unlikely we would build our own streaming service in that space, because I think the other routes to market are really lucrative. What's really interesting for us is thinking, where is streaming underserved globally? Where are there opportunities to build services, products, brands that represent the best of the BBC, but actually have a sort of underserved audience in the market? And sort of as an example, with BritBox, we built that around comforting, older skewing procedural content, and it's been hugely successful because of that, because it's not been what's been driving Netflix. But actually what's interesting is that in this sort of post-COVID world, I'm seeing a real shift from the sort of challenging viewing of gritty, dark content to stuff that's warmer, that's safer, that's more comforting. And actually so we're really well placed to be able to exploit that, because that's not where the big players have been fishing over the last few years.
And that content would be available on BritBox or BBC iPlayer for your domestic market?
Yeah, exactly.
So Ben, no pressure, mate. But really, it sounded like from the conversations, the future is definitely in-flight connectivity and being able to meet those needs of these streaming platforms, either coming from the BBC, and from the other players, and they're growing by the day. What does that look like really for airlines to be able to provide that at-home, on-the-ground experience in flight?
Yeah, well, thanks Paul and everyone for the dialogue. It's great, and really excited to be here. One of the key things, and you mentioned a little bit, is IFC in-flight connectivity is getting better. There is better technology. There's significantly more investment, so there's just more throughput, more performance, more capability, but it's still not consistently great. There isn't really a utopia yet. I get the sense that it's coming, and there's various technologies that will deliver that. I won't go into those because they're all slightly different. But because there are lots of different technologies, there's also varying degrees of throughput and latency and performance, which means various degrees or varying degrees of passenger or user experience, which creates a bit of a problem. So where we need to get to is the IFC industry broadly is more than enough throughput to provide the capability to deliver streaming services. And also in the case of CSPs, I was listening with intent to Paul, is providing the last mile part for let's say more traditional ways of faster, cheaper, more frequently refreshed content to the aircraft, all of which is very possible over in-flight connectivity. There just needs to be a greater alignment between the IFE platforms, however those things are delivered, whether it's wirelessly, streamlessly, as streaming, as Jag is mentioned is happening at WestJet and lots of other airlines, or whether it's through the more traditional legacy IFC systems. So I think IFC has its work cut out, because, you know, to go to your analogy of the student on the bus, there is an expectation of capability and performance. There's a very low tolerance level of poor performance, and we're not there yet. I think it's getting better. I don't think there's real value being delivered in the IFC space at the moment. It's what you really want is value for excellent service, and I think there's room to maneuver on both of those where we are today.
So you mentioned earlier kind of the different technology, and without kind of getting into the debate, there's probably another session on this, and we all know you just can't compare apples with apples in this space. But, you know, does the type of connectivity really matter? You know, if you're Jag going out there buying a connectivity solution of other airline, isn't it just about the size of the pipe and having a clear strategy, as you mentioned, for that whole experience, and not just understanding this is the technology?
It is, and I think as Jag mentioned as well, it's not just providing connectivity for a passenger. There's a lot more people or things on a plane that can use or derive value from that connectivity. Of course, the passenger is the headline one. We're all passengers, and we all have an opinion on what connectivity and other things should be. But if you look across all the stakeholders of the airline, you understand that if you start getting huge capability to an aircraft, you can do much more with that, either in terms of revenue opportunities or savings, operational savings, or other things. So I think there's a number of things there. But what we really need to deliver through whatever technology it is make sure from an airline perspective that the solution that's being sought or procured or evolved to is doing exactly what the airline passengers want to do, not just necessarily for the next few years, but has the ability to evolve and grow and morph into whatever passengers want to do in the future. And that's more and more online, and it's more and more high performance, high capacity, low latency 5G type stuff. That's just going to come more and more. So yes, a bigger pipe or higher bandwidth, fine, but there's a bit more to that, and airline by airline is different, and no one knows the passengers better than an airline, as Jag knows very well, and you've known from your previous experience.
So you mentioned alliance there, you know, or being aligned. What is going to get that alignment that is going to help the last mile, is going to be able to airlines to be able to integrate into mobile apps to deliver those notifications around COVID updates? What's going to drive that?
Well, I mean, from a connectivity perspective, you know, the connectivity industry, our responsibility is really driving the capability to be able to make those things happen. I think the alignment or the openness of platforms comes elsewhere in the chain, and there is a lot of talk about open platforms allowing airlines to deliver their own digital capabilities onto these platforms and integrate with other, let's say, more legacy types of things. But I think I think now more than ever, we talk about acceleration due to COVID, sort of pushes those things to the fore a little bit, because all these things can be done technically, and there's a bit of a pause in terms of delivery. So lots of people can sort of think, well, how do we do this? What's the industry looking for, and how can we position ourselves either as an IFC or an airline or a CSP or a content provider? How can we start striving to get to that utopia that the market clearly is starting to recognize?
So I guess the question for the panel then is that if we're seeing a picture now where connectivity is only going to get, the capacity on connectivity is only going to grow. We've got studios and content providers creating their own, continuing to create content, creating their own products and platforms to deliver that, so they can own the relationship with the customer and provide that personalized experience, be it at home or in a hotel. You've got airlines that have equipped their aircraft with connectivity. Who's going to be the conduit? Who's going to pull that together? Who's going to lead that to bring all that together? Because we can see it, but at the moment it feels a little bit fragmented to actually meet where everybody's going in a direction. That actually creates a great experience for customers where they can be at home and they get on an aircraft and it all feels very seamless. So who's going to drive that and create that collaboration?
Can I just add to the question or the context a little bit as well? I think another key part of it from the connectivity and maybe even the alignment of passengers to the airline is one of authentication. So getting past the barrier of subscribing to a service or paying for a level of service or whatever it is. And there's lots of work going on by organizations such as the Seamless Air Alliance to try and remove the barriers of that happening. So again, to take your analogy of the student on the bus, they go from the bus to the airport terminal, straight into free Wi-Fi, onto the aircraft. You know, it should be a seamless path so that person isn't interrupted from whatever it is they're doing and multitasking on device or devices. And there's no reason why that shouldn't continue in the air. And you're seeing lots of entities coming together to provide that seamless situation. And that's just one of the parts, right? The authentication of those things. But I just wanted to provide that as part of the context as well.
Okay. Any thoughts from anyone else on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as an experienced provider, I believe the content service provider has a key role, as you mentioned, being sort of piggy in the middle, as you described it, for better or for worse. There's only more elements to that need an orchestrator to bring it together. And I think it absolutely has to be led by an airline to start with, to bring that together. We see that today where we have airlines that have, you know, multiple in-flight entertainment hardware vendors, right? You need an airline to make everyone bring it together. But for sure that it is going to be around building that experience and how that is all sucked together. And you know, there are going to be a lot of stakeholders in that, you know, and we talked about brands. I think brands will be, you know, become bigger, will have bigger and bigger part to play in that. How is that going to be managed? But again, you know, the agility, the ability to turn around a change quickly. It's not just the last mile. It's can you decide tomorrow that you want to change it, and we can change it. And there's lots there in terms of the way that systems are managed on board aircraft. How quickly can we change the software? You know, historically, is it a 6-month certification program, or can we, like on the ground, that student that is looking, you know, using Netflix are turning around changes daily. They're doing A/B testing. They're doing all sorts of things that enable that experience to be built. And that, you know, that's what needs to happen in the IFE space at a core, is to change the dynamic of the agility and speed of deployment to make these changes.
What you're talking there is you're assuming a seat back experience, but if we look at a future where there's no more seat back, because
tomorrow,
that all goes away, right? We don't need to worry about that.
Well, if depends. If you're streaming to your device from a server on the aircraft, you've still got to update that. If that goes away, and Spafax can deliver an OTT service from the ground that is that is that experience, we would be there tomorrow. We're already delivering pre and post flight solutions with content and expanding that on board, but we limit the functionality that we push on board. I think the day when that comes is a little way away, but the day it's there, that opens up the experience that we're already trying to provide and having to constrain today.
So Jag, maybe ask you to take your WestJet hat off for a moment, because obviously can't talk fleet strategies and stuff, but let's suggest you've got a new fleet coming in that doesn't have a traditional IFE system that's got a server. It's got a monitor that's like a dumb monitor, and it basically the customer pairs to it either a Chromecast or some way they connect to it. Those partnerships for the future is power, connectivity, and a monitor. So where are those relationships going forward for the content? Is it a OneWeb that really they facilitate the delivery of the content, but the relationship is with John, where really he's providing that content? And actually, do you have a relationship with John because the content just comes physically?
I think that's where the interesting part, and I kind of mentioned it at the start, like this opportunity that we're given right now, with a lot of the knowledge that's left our partners and organizations, it's driving people to think differently. And it doesn't matter how you used to do it before. It's just like, how do we want to do it now? And how are we going to get there, right? Because so-and-so is not, at your organization anymore, so-and-so partners, don't have the knowledge, or even the studios are losing these specific departments. The people that are left to this, I mean, I'm not going to be too confident here, but everything's being left to the digital folks at any of these organizations now. And you can see not just within the airline space, but across the board, everything's kind of moving towards that that digital kind of lifestyle. So I think having that mindset of agility and doing that A/B testing and thinking about user experience, and not necessarily that design thinking kind of mindset is what's going to drive any of these changes. Because I think we've caused our own issues by closed platforms or closed systems, or everybody in the supply chain not having skin in the game. Like kind of like Ben mentioned, and sorry Ben, I'm not gonna call you out, but you have satellite providers and connectivity providers or whatever at the end of the day that just say, I just provide service A. Now someone else figures out, does it actually meet my end-to-end needs? But what you need is everybody in that ecosystem to kind of think about it from the same mindset, which at the end of the day should always be the user experience, right? So are you building for a special, like someone, an expert or a frequent flyer, or are you building for mass, right? So that's, I think, something that'll definitely, I think it's a great opportunity. And I think we've already started seeing this, with the partners and stuff that we work with, and it's an exciting time, but at the same time, it's an uncomfortable time for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. It creates certainly creates opportunity, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, with unfortunately fleets no longer flying, saying goodbye to many fleets of 747, but those did have all the systems on, which prohibited Spafax and others to deliver the experience that we need. It's not the CSP's challenge. They're supporting older systems, which they'd like to move on, and focus on those. The same with the IFE vendors. If you can get it tighter, from a mobile app perspective, you've got two platforms that you're supporting. If only we could be in that world, and we're not yet. I guess I'm conscious. And you
mentioned that you can, and you mentioned to kind of take off my WestJet hat and just kind of look at those partnerships. I think you're going to start seeing non-traditional partners coming into the mix. Ones that have zero airline experience, ones that theoretically don't care about how we used to do it in the past, right? You know, you look at airlines, or you look at satellite providers, or you look at CSPs, or you look at connectivity partners and stuff. Everybody's got that, not that same mindset, but you've got that aviation kind of mindset, right? Like, you've got the history, you've been told those stories back in the past of why things didn't work, why they did, or why things are the way they are. I think you're going to see those partners that, you know, like the Ubers and the Netflix and those types of the world, that see an industry that they can go in and disrupt. I think it's just going to be a matter of time before, you know, someone comes in and starts, you know, playing in this playground.
It'll be interesting, right? Because they're going to get a different ear. They're going to get someone listening differently, where, you know, if John's out with BritBox, potentially we've gone, oh no, that's too hard, we can't do that. But now it's going to be, actually, commercially, that's a much better solution for us to deliver content to our customers. But then we will get to the challenges, and that's where really it sits with the OneWeb and the other connectivity providers, of how they're going to meet that need, because actually it does get a lot simpler. It gets a lot easier for us to get content out there in real time and create that entertaining experience that we all want to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, I came from a non-IFEC background. I came from a digital background. I mean, I came from a self-serve application, and, you know, just the thought in my mind of waiting so long to do something or even try something, it's like, it's mind-blowing when you think of it, that, you know, we're so far behind from a digital standpoint, not one specific part of it, just kind of the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, the session's coming, you know, we're running out of time, and we could have talked for each of you individually for an hour. You know, there's so much content here to discuss. I'd love to have learned more around, you know, what the BBC is doing with that journey from those traditional platforms to now these digital platforms, and how you get them out. And, you know, Spafax, I know you've got some amazing stuff coming up, and that, you know, the products and services that you've got going forward. And OneWeb, Ben, you've got, you know, your products coming to market and what's happening there. But just to close, I guess what I'd be really keen to hear is, you know, what's the one thing right now that you'd want to see resolved to deliver that experience that we talked about, to give that student on the bus the same experience as they're traveling, as they're flying, when and they can get on their next flight? Maybe John, you can kick us off. Yeah,
I probably, the word for me is dynamism. And I think, you know, the way that we're thinking about our products is really dynamic. And I think that's the direction that streaming has to sort of go in. And, you know, with how it's approached to refresh, fast turnaround of content, but also its approach to curation as well. And, you know, services that just feel very different each time you go to them. And so to be able to replicate that on airlines, you know, is important for us long term.
Great, thanks, John. Jack, what's the one thing right now?
I'll go with the theme that John said, with the one word, frictionless. So making that experience as frictionless as possible, kind of going down to your bus example, and then, you know, further down into the airport, like Ben kind of said, the user doesn't have to do anything. They don't need to be an expert in using that technology, right? Like, they use it every day. They're not, you know, they don't have to learn something to use it, and we make our guests learn to use our systems. So I think that's where the biggest thing is, you know, as a general rule, you prioritize and build for the mass. You look at those first times, you look at those novice, you look at those anxious flyers, build it for them. The experts just come along with it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The relearn's a big one. Having designed and launched 3 IFEC systems myself, each time the last version looks quite similar to a streaming platform, because we don't want them to have to relearn that. We want to be engaged in the content and the experience, or to have to learn that. Paul, what would be the one thing you'd like to see resolved?
I think it's across the board an increase in agility and speed to market of literally every service. So that in terms of in-flight entertainment, so that's the, you know, delivery of the last mile, being able to, or that whole area, you know, we're so far away from the ground that as an ethos and a sort of way of living kind of needs to change. And I know it's deep rooted in aviation and safety and the way that we've come from, but the passenger, the passenger expects an experience that on the ground is born of that agility, and the only way we're going to make it is to have that agility. We're not just going to be able to click our fingers and pick up what they're going on the ground. We need to work, deliver it in the time scales that has enabled those platforms to be built, and we need to do that in the air.
Great, thanks. And Ben, listen to the guys. Dynamic, frictionless, agility. That's what comes with connectivity. That's what we get on our mobile devices. We get that experience. So, not sure whether you're feeling the pressure, as I said earlier, but it's not the pressure, it's the opportunity that connectivity provides us all to deliver the experience. So, what's the one thing that you want to resolve for OneWeb to be truly successful?
Yeah, I wonder how good the camera is, but my mouth is watering with all these suggestions coming. It's clearly what connectivity is about and what OneWeb is about in terms of being creative, disruptive, agile, all these sorts of things. But it really is music to my ears, and it should be for any IFC provider, that we as an industry need to align. We need to be more aware of what the passengers and the users of this connectivity wants to do, and just get on with it. There is this legacy of things take a long time, and in the right places they should. You should certify things that for safety they need certifying. But in other stuff, and Jack hit the nail on the head. Get people in who aren't necessarily from this industry and say, I don't care what you did before. This is what we need to do now. Let's just do it. So I think throwing away a lot of the old mentality of, well, let's have a few meetings or get together twice a year and come up with a solution or a standard in 8 years' time. Just forget about that. In every other terrestrial environment, they've come up with revolutionary things in a relatively short space of time. I think we can mimic that throughout the IFEC industry without too much sweat.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely revolution coming here, but it's also opportunity. There's radical simplification coming that we've wanted, and it's come at the price of COVID, as I said, with those older fleets now exiting. There's a different way of thinking coming through as different areas take responsibility, be it in the airlines, be it in studios. And there's been change in the supply base as well. And as unfortunate as that's been, that does create change and it creates new opportunity. It's been awesome talking with you all. So I've learned heaps as I continue to in this space. That's why I still stay passionate, and my business works in this area as well as other verticals. And I still keep close and watching what's happening. Just remains for me to say thank you guys for your time today, and hand back to Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That really was a compelling session with lots of honest views on sensitive subjects, which we really wanted to achieve. So I'm delighted with that output, guys. Thank you so much. And I know this is a topic of discussion that will run, and I look forward to providing a platform for dialogue around it through the Virtual Expo 365 platform that we're going to launch next March that will run a whole year, so we can really use it as a hub for engagement around all of these kind of issues. So yeah, I'd like to personally thank Paul, John, Jag, Paul and Ben for their valued time and participation, and I'm sure our audience feel the same. There's actually some really great presentations around content disruption and lots more actually in our Apex Tech sessions that we've pre-recorded and are ready to go in our on-demand speaker zone right now. So be sure to check that out if you haven't had the chance already. We have a half an hour break now before our last session of the day, focusing on tomorrow's world in travel, which has insights from Virgin Hyperloop and A-Cube by Airbus, which I'm sure is going to be very interesting too. So thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye for now.